Ron, thank you so much for joining the show.
I'm good to be here. Good to be here.
Yeah, definitely. Where are you at right now?
I am in Addison, Texas right now.
Addison, Texas. Is that close to where's that close to for most of the cities I know in Texas?
Well, it's a suburb of Dallas, and I'm about, if you've been to the DFW airport, I'm probably 11 miles east of the Dallas airport. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I just remember all my trips out there when we were working together over at our last company or a couple companies ago as agile coaches and taking trips over to what was that little town? Grapevine,
grapevine.
Texas.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love that little town, man. They had cool little pubs there, some wine tasting. Yeah, it's a good
yeah.
spot.
It's a real progressive kind of place.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So Ron, we've worked together for on and off for a number of years now, and
Hmm.
I know you put a tremendous amount of work into getting your PhD, and
Yes.
so I definitely want to talk about that and what that journey was like. But I'm literally just going to read off the title of your PhD. I guess it's the dissertation, right? And kind of talk a little bit about that because I think a lot of it applies. It directly applies to some of the work we do as agile coaches and business coaches in general, working with organizations to help them transform to this new and better way of working. So your dissertation was implicit and explicit measures of coordination effectiveness as predictors of agile software development project success, a regression approach. And I really liked your opening statement out of your abstract, and I'll quote this directly: from household appliance components and simple web searches to smartphones, spacecraft controls, and enablement of global economic activity, software is a ubiquitous, and an essential facet of 21st century life. Thus, software development activity contributes significantly to the United States economy. So maybe we could spend a couple minutes and just talk about, from your travels out there, what's the landscape look like now? What have you seen working with some of the largest organizations out there that you've worked with so far?
Well, I've worked with some of the largest, Fortune 50, Fortune 10, Fortune 5 companies, basically. And the if if anything, it's grown exponentially as far as the dependence on software. It's basic organizations are no longer about products or about technology. Delivering using technology to deliver goods and services to customers. And
Yeah.
the focus has kind of changed on how we can do that in the most efficient manner. At the time that I worked on my dissertation, when I did the research, it was about like almost 2% of our GDP is spent on software development or of one kind or another. And I would just a guess, I would expect that to be probably in orders of maybe 3 to 4% now, and just in
Mhm.
5 years, it's grown that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's huge, and you can. I think what's evidence of that is the job market around software development, data science. And, we're progressing into some new territory with I hate to use this blanket term, but artificial intelligence. But that whole field is just exponentially growing as well. So the need for specialists and technologists has grown immensely and continues to grow. So yeah, and I've seen it as well. But yeah, I think what you said was perfect. We have a growing dependency on software and software development. I think a lot of people out there that aren't or that are using, these mobile devices and web applications and just household appliances in general, a lot of them have software built right into them. I mean, you can get refrigerators now that have large screen TVs in them, and you can interact with people in video call right from your kitchen. It's pretty incredible to smart home systems and things like that. And I think a lot of people out there take that stuff for granted. The amount of work and thought and expertise that goes into, all of this software that's powering all these devices, right?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's because it's not visible. It's not like you can look at the craftsmanship in a BMW. You can see that, you can feel it, it's tactile. With software, the user interface looks good, but that's a very small part of what all goes into making this work. And most people don't really have an appreciation for that unless they're involved in the industry some way or another. And even then, I mean, like we were talking before the meeting, I was doing a class today, and there were people in there that worked in IT that still haven't heard of some of the newer methodologies that we use to develop software. So it's it's very interesting to realize that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know I come across a lot of folks, especially, you would think that would just be part of the curriculum and vernacular that's used in, at the university level. A lot of times, I know it is in the programs that you teach, some of the universities that you're on faculty. But it's kind of a staggering, to me, about how many people are coming in the workforce aren't acclimated or familiar with these newer, more effective and efficient ways of working, especially in some of the big three, consulting firms, with a lot of those folks that I work with as well. So yeah, and it is so true. It's not tactile. You take that stuff for granted. We just get a new iPhone and we expect it to be faster and better with better cameras, but you see the hardware, but because we're in the industry, have such a deeper level of appreciation for the work that goes into powering that hardware. And I always think, and I've always said this for years now, is, when the iPhone first came out and things like that, and we made these leaps in technological advancement, that we were blown away. Our expectations were overly met, and now it's like technology and software can't even keep up with our human expectations. Like, our expectations are growing at a far more rapid rate than technology can keep up in a lot of areas. Some are advancing more, or ahead of them, like space travel and things like that, but we expect everything now. If you wait more than a half a second for a web page to load, you're getting pissed off,
That's true. That's very much true. Once you experience the faster throughput, you expect it all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of the way
So
it goes.
I found, your study very, very interesting. And I certainly haven't read through all couple hundred pages of it, but I did read the abstract and, just to get down to the meat of it. And I'd love for you to spend some time and talk about this, because I think it's super relevant, especially in today's environment. But you studied and proved the importance of explicit coordination alongside implicit coordination of activities around software development. Explain exactly what, implicit and explicit coordination is.
Well, coordination in general is when we have to interface or interact with someone else to perform what we want to do. Okay, and it could be, it happens at different levels. There's the personal coordination that happens like between team members. I need you to do something before I can do my thing, or we need to work together on this, like in a pair programming situation. Then there's coordination between teams or organization levels and that kind of stuff. So we have a dependency somewhere that we need. Well, we have to coordinate the delivery or the fulfillment of that dependency. And in my study, coordination is viewed. There was a seminal work done back in, I guess, like in the 70s by a guy named Malone, Thomas Malone, and Kevin. I think his name's Kevin Cowston. It's the name. They came up with a theory of coordination, interdisciplinary theory of coordination. And I used that as kind of basis of what I was looking at, because one is a published work, just to kind of get on the dissertation track. One of the things that happens when you're doing this kind of academic research, you just can't pull things out of the air. You have to go look at the literature and find these kinds of published peer-reviewed theories out there. So I took that one, and the definition I came up with is managing or coordinating dependency among independent activities, groups, individuals involved in the organizational effort. So again, we have to work together. Coordination effectiveness is the extent that coordination results in some kind of action. And so it's the extent to which the actions manage the dependencies among these different groups. So how effective is the coordination? And there was a woman that from New Zealand that wrote her dissertation. Her thesis was on coordination, a theory of coordination in agile projects. And so I based a lot of my work on hers plus the Malone and Crouston work, and came up with a definition for coordination effectiveness, and aiming explicit coordination. And that's the component of the coordination where we have an intentional, we use coordination mechanisms to intentionally for the management of dependence amongst different groups. So we meet to talk about this issue. That's an explicit type of coordination versus implicit coordination, where we occur within ourselves kind of osmotically to borrow from what's his name, Alistair Coburn's work. He talks about osmotic communication. We have osmotic coordination where we kind of do it without really setting rules and boundaries to do that. So you hear things like teams develop a common mindset. But we adjust our behavior based on what we know about people we interact with. So if I know that I can count on you to write certain code that I'm dependent on, then that's kind of an implicit coordination. I trust you to do that. It's an accountability thing. And one of the things with the Agile world, back in the time that I did the study, which is the 2014 time set, 2015 time frame, and Agile has grown a lot since then. I think at the time that I did the study, it was about 50% of the organizations, IT organizations that were surveyed, were engaged in some type of Agile activity, where now I think the latest articles that I read, it's somewhere around maybe 75 to 80%. And just in the last 5 years, it's almost doubled, or 50% increase. At the time I did the survey, there was not a lot of literature on this. That's one of the reasons that I did the study, is to kind of address that gap in the literature. And so I had to make some assumptions here based on what I was looking at, and kind of expected what I could see it could generalize that to the bigger population. And so I used the theories that her name was Diane Stroud, the woman from New Zealand that did this study, and I used her theoretical assumptions. She talks about boundary objects and all these kinds of things. But basically, what I found out from my study, I surveyed about I got about 150 responses. I sent out about 1,200 and some odd, and performed a simple, a multiple regression analysis. We did a kind of a 14-level regression analysis. And what I found out is that explicit coordination, that kind of purposeful coordination, had a higher correlation with project success than implicit coordination. And at the time I was doing the study, I was looking at this and I was thinking that all the literature was all about this osmotic, you get a bunch of people together and you co-locate them in a room and magic's going to happen, right? And my consulting work I was doing at the time didn't really align with that. We had to have the teams meet, and we had to have, a stand-up meeting where we talk about three, what I did yesterday, what I'm going to do today, what I'm going to do tomorrow. Those are very explicit types of terms that we do. And there wasn't, in my view, a lot of implicit coordination going on. And so what I found was that both are necessary for agile project success. And in my survey, I defined agile project success as not only the kind of the scope and the time and budget, but the actual satisfaction or that the stakeholders had with the frequency of delivery, which is a big key in the Agile Manifesto. We deliver working software frequently, right? And so that was a matter of fact, I think it says that's how we measure success, right? And so I put that into the study and came up with that. And so what I found is that it takes both to make something successful, but it takes the implicit measures have to be there before the explicit measures really kind of kick in. And it may be, looking back, you could say, well, maybe the fact that since there was only like half of the companies around were doing agile, that it was kind of a transition period, and the stakeholders really weren't, didn't understand what agile was all about. That it was actually more successful, but they just didn't understand. So there's some kind of bias there that maybe I didn't account for. Looking back on it, from this perspective and some of the additional work I've done, I kind of see it as that it's a kind of a maturity thing. The teams that have reached higher levels of maturity seem to do better. The implicit measures seem to be more of a component of their success than the explicit measures. So I've been on teams where they stop having, the daily stand-ups and reduce it to maybe 2 times a week. Because they're functioning so well that they feel like that time is used better, getting work done instead of coordinating with each other, those kinds of things. So that's kind of where I'm at with it right now. It's a kind of a maturity thing. If you start to mature a team, you start with the explicit stuff, make them follow the rules and communicate and coordinate with each other. And then once they get to understand the process, then then they get to where they enter that more explicit state of doing work.
Yeah. And that seems to align well with, another agile principle, which is pulled from Japanese martial arts called shu-ha-ri, right?
Right.
So you start in the shu phase, which is being very prescriptive, working together daily, all of that, and you get the motions down. I think this was part of the Karate Kid movie as well, just repetition of motion and moves. And the Ha stage, where they start to depart from that prescriptiveness a little bit, and then the Re stage where they're making new moves themselves, putting it all together and mastering it.
Yeah, and I would suspect, my guess would be, is if I replicated the study today, the results might be different. One of the things I might want to include as a control variable is some kind of maybe maturity evaluation of the respondents. So they get them to tell me how mature they think their team is and see if there's a correlation there, which would be a good way to maybe a good follow-on. I don't know if I would want to do it, but maybe there's a graduate student out there that would like to, and I'd be happy to work with them on that.
Yeah. Yeah. After your, it took you I think you worked your PhD for 7 or 8 years? About 7 years?
Took me 7 years to get it done.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, fairly typical, especially when you're working at it part-time. And I was thinking about this the other day, that a lot of back when I first started college, a long time ago, we didn't have the internet and stuff. And if you wanted to do any real research, you had to go camp out in the library forever. I don't think that I would have been able to do this and maintain a full-time job and be a husband and father and all that stuff and complete this PhD at the same time without the internet and the technology that, we're engaged in.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of hard work. It took a long time. I think we've lessons learned on this is that if I had it to do over again, I would probably try to figure out some way to, once I finished the first couple of years, which is the first couple of years for most programs of this type, I'm not sitting in a lab, learning from the greatest physicists in the world. It's not that kind of doctoral work, but I did have an advisor and a mentor, and he was an expert and all that. And it would have been better to just kind of figure out some way to do it full time. Once I finished that first couple of years and passed the comprehensive exam process, which was a whole different kind of stress that you've got maybe probably $60,000-$70,000 invested in this, in your future. Whether or not you continue the program depends on this one comprehensive exam. And I suffered, I think, a significant amount of post-comprehensive exam stress disorder after that.
But you should coin that's a new ailment. Sure.
Maybe. I mean, it was like, it took me a good 6 months before I could pick up another journal article and read it. I was just so spent. But I would figure out some way to do it full time, because one of the things that happens is to maintain the integrity of your research. It needs to be recent and relevant research, right? So most of the schools want you to have the literature that you review, which is the basis of your study. Basically, you can't just, you have to prove to your school and your advisors and stuff that the study produces new knowledge, and it's interesting to someone. So it has to pass the who cares and the so what test. And the more relevant it is, the better you have, better that is, the better you pass those tests. And for me, one of the things that happens when you extrapolate this out over 3, 4, 5, 6 years is that life happens, right? And, my father passed away during this time, and there was all kinds of stuff that helped kind of roadblocks, if you will. And I think if I'd had a couple of years to just work on it full time, I probably could have knocked it out. One of the issues I had is that the literature that I had started to use in the beginning got stale. It wasn't relevant. They want it to be within 5 years of the time you submit your dissertation for committee approval.
Right.
And
makes
so,
sense.
yeah, and they only want if you do anything older than 5 years, it has to be very seminal work, like the Malone and Crouston work, and it has to be recognized as seminal work and by other scholars. And so there's things like that I probably could have avoided had I just figured out some way to pay bills and do this full time. For a couple of years. And one is, I could have got the research done. Now the study itself, one of the things that a lot of schools don't explain to you when you start these programs is that you got to finance your own research, and conducting a scientific survey is not cheap. You have to pay for that out of pocket in addition to your tuition. And then in my case, I'm not a statistician, so I needed to hire a statistician to help me with the statistics on this. I understood everything he was doing, but whether or not I was doing reliable and valid statistics and things like that, I needed that coach, if you will. You're familiar with coaching. And I had to pay somebody to coach me through the statistics. And those are expenses that I didn't anticipate that kind of do this. But it was a transformational type of experience. I'm a very much different person than I was when I started it. I have a different perspective on life. I'm a better critical thinker than I was when I started, and I think the whole process made me a better member of society, if you will. And I don't, it's one of those kind of things that stresses you and it's like a physical activity. It's like lifting weights, and you go through the stress and you bulk up and become stronger and better. And that's kind of how I feel about it now. I've
Yeah.
been able to work this into a full-time faculty job at a school called Amberton University, where we do a project management, an MBA in project management, and a Master of Science in Agile Project Management. And I was able to author both of those programs and get them launched. We've probably graduated, maybe 1,000 students since the MBA program. We did that back in 2010, and the Agile program is just a year old now. We've got a couple of hundred students enrolled in the program and graduated our first 10 or 15 this last term.
I mean, that's great because, I've had several conversations, not just with my wife, but with some other folks. And, my thought, and I keep going back to, all these, I want to call them kids. They seem like kids to me at this point, not that I'm too old, but, getting a master's in agile, project management and all that. I mean, that's a big ticket right there. I mean, that's a big ticket into a lot of doors right there, because every company out there, you cited this a little bit earlier about, the percentage of companies that were leveraging agile principles and, practices through, one or more of many delivery frameworks. And it's really the way things are going. I think, a lot of that, to me, my theory is that, now we're actually getting data back on the success rate of projects that are, utilizing these principles, this way of thinking about planning and executing work. So now it's saving these companies, it's saving the economy in general a lot of money. And we're able to crank out more innovation at a faster rate.
Well, at the time that I did my study, the success rate for agile projects was about 42%, which was probably about a 16 or 17% improvement over prior methods. I don't like to use the term waterfall, but a sequential method. And I was doing a class today where I had to do some, look some of this up, and I think the success rate's now around 69% of agile projects that are considered successful. So, compared to prior ways of working, we're looking at order of 30% more success rate. So it makes it kind of worth the investment as far as organizations go, because we were spending a lot of money before on how to do, development the old way, and kind of having issues with it. Now, the success is kind of one of those, you can try to be precise and have real narrow range of tolerance on it. But there were a lot of projects that I was involved in back in the, pre-agile days that, while financially they might not have been or a success, or maybe we delivered them late, but they were still functional and delivered value. It's just that it wasn't in the time frame or the budget frame that was expected. So now with agile, we kind of focus on, well, how much value can I get for the dollars I want to spend? Not so how much value did I not get for the dollars I spent. So it's a different way of looking at the work. We've kind of looked at, well, we can do 80% of what you want for this budget and deliver that right away. Or if you want more, we'll do it, but it's going to take longer to, it's going to take more iterations and more sprints or whatever. And we put that decision into the hands of the person that's doing the financing and stuff. And we've gotten away from saying, okay, well, we've gotten away from kind of that fixed price mentality, that contract mentality that, where the business says, well, you said you would do this for this budget and screw you, We've gotten away from that, and that's good. That's very good.
Yeah. And I always talk about, because from us working together pretty closely recently within the last year, again at another organization, that these principles and a lot of what you researched and studied and researched and theorized on and then proved applies to, knowledge work of all kinds as well, whether it be finance, HR, um, other things. But really what it boils down to, I think for me, principally is, you know, effective, hyper effective, communication and, um, coordination, like you said, of a lot of different activities, from a lot of different parties coming from a lot of different parts of inside and outside the organization.
Yeah.
Um, so, one of the things I wanted to talk about, because, we hit on this in just a sidebar, personal conversation a while back, and I found it really interesting. Obviously your path to your PhD was a long and sometimes arduous, process, right? And, I have several friends that are on that journey right now, and several have just finished. And, I want to talk a little bit about, um, what led you to that? You brought up something earlier. I wanted you to tell the story because, it really resonated with me and I found it really interesting. But what prompted you to go the extra 10 miles and get that highest level kind of academic,
Well,
credential?
it's something I wanted to do. There was it's a personal goal that I've always had, and there's some reasons for it. And I can talk about those. But in my family, my father was he didn't get a college degree, but he was a kind of an electrical engineer, and so I was kind of the first person in my family to go to college and get a college degree and all that kind of stuff. Which I was motivated primarily because and I guess I still do. I don't know if you ever get over it, but you learn to adapt. I had what we know now as dyslexia, and it's a pretty bad case of it. My kids both have it. I think it's a hereditary thing. I'm not sure, but nowadays we have the school systems have ways of helping kids cope with it. But back in my day, you were just the stupid kid in the class, and yeah, and that kind of puts a stigma on you that you carry it through your life. And for me, going to school was kind of a way to kind of validate that didn't really apply to me. And earn the PhD with there was never really a financial motive. I don't think at my age, my place in my career, I'll ever make a positive return on investment in it financially. Personally, it's been great, but for me, it was a way to kind of say to all of those naysayers that I'm just as capable as the next guy, and that kept me going through the whole thing, and I was able
Yeah.
to do it. And now that I have it, I feel validated in some way, and
Yeah.
that's aside all of the other things, I was interested in the agile stuff. It's kind of it's kind of where I'm at in my career, and it's very interesting, all that stuff. But you have to have more than just a job, more than just a career to make it. There were a lot of times when I wanted to bail, and I kept saying, well, that's what people would say. You just couldn't do it. You just couldn't cut it. And that kept me motivated and kept me in there. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. That's really powerful, Ron. I mean, you know, attaining that level of success, academically, that journey, that path. I mean, I've heard so many stories. I've heard guys that are working on it for 10, 12 years, and it's, it's hard enough without, um, being, I would say, challenged with something like that with dyslexia,
mhm.
especially back in the day when, they didn't have the treatments that they do and things that they can do now. And, having persevered through that and having the drive and determination, I mean, that speaks volumes, so, that's really great. That's really empowering, especially for a lot of people listening out there that might be, have something that's standing in the way or being told they can't do something, it's, your story is great. It's great
Yeah.
for that.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. I
I
appreciate that.
appreciate you, sharing that. You know, I can't help but remember, I'm trying to tie a correlation back here because, what I would love to walk away from our conversation and some of the work that you spent a good part of your life and so much work pursuing with this implicit and explicit coordination. I remember back in, I think it was 2013, when Yahoo hired a new CEO, Marissa Mayer.
Hmm.
And one of the first things she did, an internal memo went out and then it leaked to the public, was basically banned all remote workers. And
Hmm.
it really, I mean, it hit every news channel and it was huge, huge news. People are like, what is this woman doing? This is the new way of working. It not only saves, organizations just an incredible amount of money and resources, but, um, you know, sometimes your team, your organization may be located somewhere where the talent pool might be a little smaller. So you have to reach out it's just, in 2013, I have to think that the technological advancements, the tools that we could utilize right now to have a presence even remotely, were still there. They may not have been as good, but she, I read an article recently. She's no longer with Yahoo, but I read an article recently that she still stands behind that. And unfortunately, she that kind of is her legacy at Yahoo. When she made that decision, it pissed a lot of people off inside and outside of Yahoo. But remote, collated or remote workforce is still won the game and is continuing to win and become even more prevalent out there. So maybe if you could just spend a couple minutes on your thoughts on that. It's something that a lot of the organizations that I work with, I'm sure you work with, still, maybe it's not fully remote 5 days a week, but at least a portion of it. And with the tools that we have out there, how does the maintaining that good level of it and advancing and that you're getting better at, implicit or explicit coordination, you know, spend a couple minutes and talk about that. What do you hypothesize or theorize on that?
Well, I think that my study could help inform some of the decisions that people make in that area. In that, we have all these wonderful technologies that allow us to communicate, video, chat, all that kind of stuff. And like you say, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I don't think I've been at any organization yet that had everybody 100% co-located. There were
Right.
islands of teams that were co-located, but even those teams had dependencies on outside people, vendors, and that kind of stuff. And so I think that the whole work from home model or the work remotely model, I've worked on probably one of the most geographically diverse projects I worked on was back in I don't know, it was several years ago, but we had a project where we had people in Ireland, France, India, China, Australia, California, Texas, and on the East Coast. So we covered the entire globe.
Was
We were
that was that
able,
your work? Was that your work with Match?
no, it was with Texas Instruments.
Oh, okay.
Um, I was working with Texas Instruments with the calculator group, and we were developing a new uh, software for a new calculator they had. It's the TI Inspire that you see in the one of the first versions. It's not the one you see now, but it was one of the earlier versions of the Inspire. And the Inspire works a lot like a little iPhone, basically, or an iPad where you can download apps and stuff. And so we had all these companies developing apps for it. We had the company in Australia was developing a spreadsheet app that goes on it. The folks in India were developing a 2D math app and things like that. But we had to coordinate all of that work and get it all into, because one of the things that happens when you're dealing with manufacturing calculators, especially when you have the school situation, you have pretty much a deadline that you have to have these things leaving the factory. And they were, they built them in Shenzhen at the time. I think they still do, but they needed to be on the boat basically, and headed to the warehouse like 1st of May in order to make it to your Target store by the beginning of the school year. And so it was quite an ordeal to coordinate with all those things. And I think had I had done the study by then, you could learn to kind of develop a coordination strategy, if you will, that says, we need to make sure that everybody knows why we're doing what we're doing. We need to make sure they know what's going on and when it's going on. And we can use technology to do that, Trello boards or whatever. Know what to do and when to do it. Maybe we have a daily coordination call, kind of like a stand-up meeting or a daily scrum meeting, knowing who's doing what. So that goes back to that daily meeting. Or maybe we have, with a remote team, I think I would probably want to do those a couple of times a day. Just a 10-minute call that says, hey, what are you doing with the whole team on? What are you going to do? And what kind of, how can I help you? And then we need to know who the experts on the team. So maybe you've got somebody in another location that, they have a particular skill. We want to make sure that everybody on the team knows what that skill is, so that when we need that, we can coordinate that, deliver that dependency with that person. Mm-hmm. And then there's the part of coordination is, well, what we're doing, or is it in the right place at the right time? And is it the right thing that we're doing? And so all of those kinds of coordination aspects, you will, of coordination effectiveness, if you address all, what is it? There's like 7 of those items. I think you could develop a pretty good coordination strategy for remote teams and remote work that would keep the project moving efficiently. It's kind of a common idea with a lot of remote work that, it takes 24-hour turnaround and all that kind of stuff. But I think you could collapse that to, where you can hand off work to maybe, somebody that's working a different time zone. You work your time zone, and then when it's time for you to go, you hand off the work to them. That was always the ideal, but it never really worked because we didn't have effective ways of coordinating the work with each other. And that's where I think the study that I did could help inform that work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I was reading about Yahoo was, her argument for, banning all these remote workers was it affects your collaboration. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you have, the steps or the processes or boundaries in place, that, that collaboration and coordination can still be just as effective as having somebody, there in person, especially when you're leveraging
Correct.
some of the technologies, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now there's no substitute for having that personal kind of interaction with people. And I think you can still achieve that by having, maybe some kind of frequent get-togethers. Like one of the companies where you and I both worked, they would bring people in to, from India to actually stay on site for a month. And they would rotate those people out. And you got to know them kind of on a personal basis. It's hard to replicate that. But all the other aspects of coordination, I think you can achieve, especially with some of the technologies we have, where you can get on Skype and have or Hangouts, Google Hangouts and things like that. And you can, or GitHub has what is it they have? But all the online kind of permanent connectivity tools that we have today, there's no reason we can't achieve that same level of coordination.
Yeah. Yeah. And some companies, I was working for a small startup. I was consulting with them for a bit, and they brought in, they made an investment in virtual presence robots. So that's a new thing. And these things look like poles on wheels with iPads at the top, and they actually learn the layout of your office. And when it's meeting time, they can find their way, navigate to a conference room, and kind of stand up like I have a seat at the table, and you could see somebody's face like they're interacting in a regular meeting. They can share documents on it and everything, which is pretty incredible.
I saw that at one of my clients, and they actually did pair programming with those things. They would, they would have somebody, you'd be sitting in your desk and the robot would be right, the little, I call it the robot, but anyway, it would be sitting right there next to them, and they would be on a, virtual machine, virtual desktop where they could both access the same thing, and they would sit there and have that kind of, it was pretty much near the same kind of interaction you'd have if you were sitting physically right next to each other. It was quite amazing to see that work.
It's incredible. Yeah, I'm looking at a couple right now, and they range anywhere from a couple $100 up to $5,000-$6,000, depending on the quality of the robot you get. But
There's technology out there that has to do with artificial intelligence in building what they call cognitive compilers, where the software compiler has AI built into it, so that the business owner, the business user, whoever wants a product can actually interact with the compiler through natural language processing. And so you think of the user story kind of format as this, I want that so that I can do this, right? So you kind of talk to the AI in that kind of syntax. And it figures out, it takes a guess at what it thinks you want, right? Generates the code automatically and throws you a demo, if you will, an example of what it thinks you're going to do. And you tell it, oh, yes, this is what I want or what I don't want. And you do those through several iterations, and it basically starts to learn and is able to predict your patterns to where it can actually generate code that can go into production without any human interaction, except at the beginning and maybe at the very end when the consumer consumes it. This is kind of what's got me excited right now to see where that goes.
yeah, that's very exciting stuff. I'm fascinated by the whole AR world. I was reading up on it. I've got this interest in. I think there's a big problem with recommendation engines, right? So for like websites, whether it's a shopping experience or discovering new music or podcasts or things like that, and there's some really cool stuff going on, especially at Google. Google's got an open API where you can tap into a lot of their AI kind of algorithms and machine learning language, and they make that they expose those publicly for developers to work with. So you can build some really cool either natural language stuff or or not, and it's pretty amazing the advancements that are going on in that space. And I've just started to take a deeper dive on it and really learn more about it, and what's available out there and how do you get started with it and all that. But it's pretty amazing what's going on. Around explicit coordination, where would you have, if you were just stepping into an organization or talking to somebody, what would be some of the first things that you would coach or guide a company to look at and do to get better at that, to really help them become more efficient, more effective in their coordination of all these various activities between teams and people, etc.?
Well, recently I've become kind of a big proponent of making work visible, regardless of whether you're Scrum or Kanban or even whether you're not even doing any of that kind of stuff. But get it out of the digital device and stick it on the wall. I think that makes it very explicit. You have to write it down and stick it on the wall and talk about it and have conversations about what you're doing. Are we doing the right thing? And is it the right time to do it? And are we doing it at the right place? In other words, do we have the right people and the right technology and all that kind of stuff? And answer those questions first. And then all the other questions of, what are we doing? How do we know what we're doing? All those kind of explicit questions can be answered. But you have to kind of get a good handle on what you're doing. I've been, I've done this, as I've done this consulting or contract work for a long time. And you get there and people have, Rally or Jira and all these tools, and they've got them just packed full of stuff. Nobody has a clue of how much work they got in the queue, And so when that happens, you have no way of coordinating the work because you don't know what the work is. So that's probably one of the first things that when I go somewhere new, that's the first thing I try to do is get them to answer the question is how much work do we have to do? And let's put that out and make that explicit. Then the next thing is how often do we talk about what we're doing? How often do we, analyze whether or not we're doing the right thing, which is kind of goes into the continuous improvement piece of it. We make explicit. I was kind of thinking about this today because the whole issue of working agreements came up, and too often teams kind of dive into the nitty gritty of I'm going to be on time for all meetings and all that kind of stuff. And I was thinking about it in more of an abstract way, in that we're going to behave in such a way that we don't embarrass each other. So let's set up some explicit rules on that. How do we become better team members? And so, don't waste time on all these details that are impossible. You're setting yourself up for failure if you say, well, you're going to be on time for every meeting. You just can't do that. But you can behave in such a way that the team can be proud of you, right? That kind of stuff. So those are some of the takeaways that I would have.
Ron, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's always fun to chat with you, and I can't wait to you get back out to California, and I hope your travels take you here sometime soon so we can grab a beer and hang out and shoot the shit a little bit. It's been awesome. Congratulations. I know you finished your PhD a while ago, but I didn't know the whole backstory, and it's a really compelling, very, very interesting work. And, I definitely learned a lot. Thanks for listening to Notables. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did,